Imagine holding a piece of American history right in the palm of your hand, a small silver-colored coin that represents more than just 25 cents. It is a symbol of a nation, its traditions, its artistry, and its enduring legacy. The Washington quarter of 1996 is not merely a circulating coin, it is a chapter in the long story of American numismatics. A story that begins in the 1930s when the United States Mint was preparing to honor the bicentennial of the birth of George Washington back. In 1932, the country was searching for a way to pay tribute to the first president of the United States, George Washington, the man who led the Revolutionary Army to victory and who became the face of American leadership and democracy. The Treasury Department and the Commission of Fine Arts began the process of selecting a design that would represent Washington on the coinage that everyday citizens would use for generations. The quarter denomination was chosen since it was one of the most heavily used coins in circulation. The final design selected was that of sculptor John Flanagan, who created a portrait of Washington that conveyed strength, dignity, and timeless leadership. The Washington quarter was introduced into circulation in 1932, and it quickly became a cornerstone of American coinage. Over the decades, it underwent slight modifications, but the portrait of Washington by Flanagan remained dominant. Its production carried through the decades of the Great Depression world. War II, the economic boom of the 1950s, and the turbulent times of the 1960s and 70s. Each quarter carried the story of its own year of minting, reflecting the social, political, and economic landscape of the United States. By the time 1996 arrived, the Washington quarter had been in circulation for 64 years. The year 1996 marked a transitional period for the United States Mint and for the Washington quarter itself. It was the final stretch before the launch of the monumental 50-state quarters program, which would begin in 1999 and completely revolutionize the way Americans viewed their coinage. The 1996 Washington quarter, therefore, stands as one of the last standard issues of the traditional Flanagan design before the new era of state-specific designs captured the imagination of millions. The 1996 Washington quarter was struck at three primary locations: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint. The Philadelphia Mint coins bore no mint mark, while the Denver coins carried the familiar D mint mark, and the San Francisco Mint produced proof issues with the S mint mark. Collectors often seek out examples from each mint because they represent the full range of 1996 issues. The proof versions in particular, struck with a mirror-like finish on highly polished planchets, showcase the artistry of the design in a way circulation strikes simply cannot. Looking closer at the coin itself, we see the obverse bearing the left-facing bust of George Washington, sculpted by John Flanagan. The word liberty arches across the top, the phrase, "In God we trust," rests to the left, and the date, 1996, sits just beneath Washington's portrait. On the reverse side, the majestic bald eagle spreads its wings, clutching arrows of strength and surrounded by olive branches of peace. Above the eagle, the words United States of America and E pluribus unum declare the national identity, while quarter dollar is inscribed below. This design had remained relatively unchanged since its introduction, offering Americans a sense of continuity and familiarity for more than half a century. The mintage of the 1996 Washington quarter was substantial, with hundreds of millions of coins struck between the Philadelphia and Denver mints, making it a common issue in circulation. However, the true value of the 1996 quarter, in numismatic terms, lies in its condition, high-grade mint state examples. Particularly those graded MS-67 or higher are considerably scarce and highly sought after by collectors. While an ordinary circulated 1996 quarter might only be worth its face value or slightly above pristine uncirculated specimens with sharp details and no wear, can command significant premiums at auction, the San Francisco proof issues also hold a special place in the story of the 1996 quarter. These proofs were struck with extraordinary care using polished dies and specially prepared planchets, resulting in coins with sharp frosted devices and mirror-like. Fields collectors who pursue proof sets from 1996 treasure these coins as part of the larger annual sets produced by the Mint. These proof quarters are not typically found in circulation, but rather sold directly to collectors, making them a more refined part of the numismatic landscape. Another important aspect of the 1996 Washington quarter is the role it played in bridging two eras of American coinage. On one hand, it represents the long-standing design tradition of the Washington quarter, series which had dominated the denomination since 1932. On the other hand, it was among the final issues before the advent of the 50-state quarters program, which began in 1999 and dramatically changed collecting habits in the United States. Millions of Americans who had never before cared about coins suddenly became engaged in collecting quarters from each state, sparking a nationwide revival in coin collecting. The 1996 quarter, therefore, is seen as one of the last of the classic quarters. Before this explosion of public interest, historically speaking, 1996 was also a significant year in the United States. The nation was in the midst of the Clinton presidency. The economy was strong and the country was preparing to enter a new millennium. The coins minted during this time, including the Washington quarter of 1996, are tiny time capsules of that era. They circulated through the pockets of Americans who were living through technological change, the growth of the internet, and a sense of optimism about the future. When you hold a 1996 quarter today, you are holding a reminder of that moment in history. Collectors and historians alike pay attention not only to the mintage numbers and mint marks, but also to varieties and errors. Errors, such as off-center strikes, double dies, or planchet flaws, can dramatically increase the value and intrigue of a 1996 quarter. While most coins struck that year were standard circulation strikes, a few error coins escaped the mint and now command strong premiums among specialists. For collectors, this adds another layer of fascination to the 1996 quarter, since finding one of these rare varieties can be both exciting and rewarding. The Washington quarter series overall had already cemented itself as one of the longest-running coin series in American history. By 1996, it had survived transitions in minting technology, the removal of silver content in 1965, and the gradual introduction of clad coinage. The coin had moved from being a silver piece of real intrinsic value to a copper-nickel clad piece whose worth was symbolic rather than metallic. Yet its role in American commerce and culture remained strong, and its image of Washington continued to be instantly recognizable. Across the nation, if we consider the artistry and symbolism of the coin, we see deeper meaning in its design. Washington's stern yet composed portrait reflects ideals of leadership, unity, and perseverance, while the eagle on the reverse recalls both strength and peace. The design choices made by Flanagan in 1932 remained relevant decades later, still resonating with Americans who saw these coins every day in their change. The 1996 quarter, therefore, was not just a coin, it was a work of art produced on a massive scale, a democratic art form that passed through the hands of millions. In conclusion, the 1996 Washington quarter stands as a meaningful artifact within the larger timeline of American coinage. It represents the continuation of a beloved design, the transition toward a new era of collecting, and a reflection of the American experience in the mid-1990s. For collectors, it offers opportunities to appreciate condition, rarity, and proof quality. For historians, it offers a window into the values and priorities of the United States at that time. And for everyday people, it remains a reminder that even the smallest coins in our pockets carry stories that stretch back generations. Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of metal that has traveled through time, carrying with it the legacy of America's first president, the struggles of a nation, and the craftsmanship of the United States Mint. Now imagine that this coin, Minted in 1981 is more than just loose change, but rather a story of artistry, economics, politics, and culture. This is not simply a Washington quarter, it is a window into the fabric of American life during one of the most fascinating transitional decades of the 20th century. And today we will unfold the complete professional history of the 1981 Washington quarter in a way that reveals its hidden significance, its production details, and its role in the larger narrative of coinage in the United States. The Washington Quarter series began in 1932 when the United States sought to honor the bicentennial of George Washington's birth. The design selected by the Treasury Department featured the portrait of George Washington created by sculptor John Flanagan, based on Jean-Antoine Houdon's famous bust of Washington from 1785. The obverse of the coin displayed this portrait with the word "Liberty" arched above the president's head, the phrase "In God We Trust" placed just to the left, and the date of minting shown at the bottom. The reverse design featured a heraldic eagle with outstretched wings perched on a bundle of arrows, symbolizing strength and preparedness, with olive branches beneath, representing the desire for peace. This design would remain in use for decades, becoming a central icon of American coinage and forming part of everyday life for generations of citizens. By 1981, the Washington Quarter had already been in production for nearly half a century, and during those years, it had undergone significant historical transitions. One of the most important changes came in 1965, when rising silver prices forced the United States Mint to abandon its traditional 90% silver composition quarters. Minted from 1965 onward, including those produced in 1981, were made of a copper-nickel clad composition consisting of an inner core of pure copper bonded between outer layers of a copper-nickel alloy that gave the coin its familiar silvery appearance. This adjustment not only ensured the continued affordability of producing quarters, but also reflected larger economic shifts in America during the mid-20th century. The year 1981 itself was significant in American history as the nation experienced economic turbulence, high inflation, and political change with Ronald Reagan's presidency. Beginning that year, coins minted in this period, including the Washington Quarter of 1981, can be seen as symbolic artifacts of the times they were produced. At 3 different mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each playing a role in the distribution of currency across the nation. Philadelphia and Denver struck business strike coins intended for circulation, while San Francisco focused on proof coinage struck with extraordinary detail and mirror-like finishes for collectors. Business strike quarters from Philadelphia in 1981 carried no mint mark, a tradition that had persisted until 1980, when the P-Mint mark was first introduced. Interestingly, the 1981 Philadelphia quarters still followed the older style with no mint mark, distinguishing them from Denver coins, which carried the letter D below Washington's hair ribbon. San Francisco proof coins bore the familiar S mint mark, but 1981 proofs are notable because the San Francisco Mint was transitioning from traditional Type 1 mint mark punches to a refined Type 2 style. The earlier Type 1S was more rounded and blobby, while the later Type 2S appeared clearer and sharper, making the 1981 proof sets highly collectible due to the presence of both varieties. The production numbers of the 1981 quarters were immense. As the demand for coinage in circulation was high, Philadelphia struck over 700 million pieces. Denver produced over 500 million, while San Francisco issued millions of proof coins for collectors. However, despite these large mintages, quality varied considerably, with circulation strikes often showing weak details or bag marks caused by mass-handling collectors, therefore prize examples with sharp strikes, minimal marks, and strong luster, particularly from original rolls or mint sets. Examining the coin itself, the obverse retained John Flanagan's original portrait, though. By 1981, decades of repeated use of the dies had softened many of the finer details in Washington's hair and facial features. The relief was somewhat lower than earlier strikes, making the coins look less sharp when compared to quarters from the 1930s and 1940s on the reverse. The eagle design continued to hold strong symbolism, yet similar wear in the die hubs meant that feather details and other elements could appear weaker unless struck from fresh dies within the numismatic community. The 1981 Washington quarter holds value not only for its role in everyday commerce, but also as part of the larger study of die varieties minting technology. And the evolution of American coinage specialists often study the differences between business strike and proof strike coins, the sharpness of the mint mark varieties, and even minor die errors that can occur during production. Doubled dies, repunched mint marks, and off-center strikes have all been documented for quarters of this era, and such pieces command premiums in the collector market. Furthermore, the 1981 Washington quarter is situated historically as one of the last issues before major design changes would reshape the quarter series beginning in 1999 with the State Quarters program, which introduced 50 new designs over a 10-year span for many collectors. The coins of the 1980s, including the 1981 issue, represent the final years of the classic eagle reverse before America shifted toward a new era of artistic and commemorative coinage. Looking deeper into the cultural context of 1981, the Washington quarter circulated heavily during a time when cash transactions dominated American life. The average citizen would carry quarters for payphones, vending machines, laundromats, parking meters, and arcade games, making the quarter one of the most widely used denominations in daily routines. The presence of the 1981 Washington quarter in circulation meant that millions of people handled these coins without giving much thought to the legacy of Washington himself or the mint's craftsmanship, yet each piece silently connected them to a history stretching back nearly 50 years. The proof sets of 1981 hold a particularly important place in numismatic history, because they were offered during a time when the mint was modernizing its proof coinage production techniques beginning in the late 1970s and into the early 1980s. The mint refined the polishing of dies and planchets to create sharper contrasts. Between frosted design elements and mirrored backgrounds, the 1981 proof Washington quarters reflect this experimentation and development, making them attractive not only for their beauty, but for their technological significance. In conclusion, the 1981 Washington quarter may seem like an ordinary piece of pocket change, but it carries with it a long professional history, stretching back to the creation of the Washington quarter series in 1932, reflecting the major changes in coin composition that occurred in 1965, embodying the economic and political spirit of America in 1981, and foreshadowing the eventual transformation of the quarter into a vehicle for widespread state and commemorative designs for the dedicated numismatist. The 1981 quarter offers endless avenues of study, from mint marks and proof varieties to strike quality and die errors. And for the casual collector or history enthusiast, it remains a tangible piece of the American story. A coin that continues to teach us about the past through its enduring presence in the present. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that not only represents a small piece of American currency, but also carries with it a layered history of design, production, economy, and culture. The Washington quarter of 1979 is one such coin that continues to fascinate collectors, historians, and everyday people who stumble upon it in their pocket. Change the story of the 1979 quarter is deeply rooted in the origins of the Washington quarter series itself, which began in 1932 when the United States was celebrating the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. At that time, the government and the Treasury Department wanted to honor the nation's first president, and the coin that was chosen for this honor was the quarter dollar. The design that was selected came from sculptor John Flanagan, who based his portrait on Jean-Antoine Houdon's 18th century bust of George Washington. The design featured Washington's profile facing left, the word liberty arched above, his head, the motto, "In God We Trust," positioned to the left, and the date of issue displayed prominently beneath Washington's portrait on the reverse. Flanagan created a heraldic eagle design based loosely on earlier American emblems. This eagle, with outstretched wings perched upon a bundle of arrows with two olive branches below, became one of the most enduring images in American coinage. By 1979, the Washington quarter had already been circulating for nearly 5 decades. Yet the late 1970s were a significant time in the broader context of U.S. coinage and economics. The United States was experiencing high inflation, fluctuating precious metal prices, and a changing role for coinage in daily commerce. The quarter remained one of the most commonly used denominations, especially as vending machines, parking meters, and public telephones increasingly relied on it. The 1979 quarter was produced at 3 major U.S. mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each mint contributing millions of pieces to meet the growing demand in circulation. The Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint used the familiar D mint mark, and San Francisco produced proof coins bearing the S mark intended primarily for collectors, the mintage numbers for 1979. Washington quarters reflect both the economic needs of the time and the ongoing production capabilities of the mint. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 600 million quarters, while Denver produced nearly 500 million, and the San Francisco Mint struck several million proof coins. The high mintage totals demonstrate just how essential the quarter was in circulation during this period, but they also mean that most 1979 quarters remain common in circulated condition. However, within this mass production, there exist certain varieties and striking differences that continue to attract the attention of numismatists. One of the most notable aspects of late 1970s and early 1980s quarters is the quality of the strikes. Collectors often note that the details of Washington's hair and the eagle's feathers vary considerably depending on the die state and production quality of each mint. When examining the cultural and historical significance of the 1979 quarter, it is important to look beyond its surface design and production numbers and consider the broader narrative in which this coin participated. The United States in 1979 was a country dealing with economic challenges, high energy prices, international tensions, and domestic debates over inflation and wages. Everyday Americans felt the pinch of rising costs, and their pocket change became a direct reflection of the nation's struggles. The quarter remained a vital tool for daily transactions, and its presence in people's lives was constant, whether used in laundromats, arcade machines, or payphones. The Washington quarter of 1979 symbolized stability in a time of change. The San Francisco Mint's proof coins from 1979 are particularly notable for their craftsmanship. Proof coins are not meant for circulation, but rather for collectors, and they are struck multiple times with specially prepared dies to create sharp details and mirrored surfaces. The 1979 proof quarters with the S mint mark were sold in proof sets, and while not considered rare, they hold special value to collectors who appreciate the artistry and higher quality of these coins. Numismatic specialists often differentiate between cameo and deep cameo examples, with the latter exhibiting frosted design elements that contrast beautifully with the mirror-like background fields. Another dimension to the 1979 quarter story lies in the transition of mint mark styles during this era, particularly at the San Francisco Mint, where a change occurred in the style of the S mint mark, creating varieties such as the Type 1 and Type 2 proofs. The Type 1 S mint mark appears more filled or blobby, while the Type 2 is clearer and sharper. Collectors seek out these differences and assign premiums accordingly. This kind of subtle distinction reveals just how much depth can be found, even in coins that were produced in the millions. Every small variation becomes a historical marker telling us about the minting technology, quality control, and design decisions of the time. The Washington quarter itself continued unchanged in major design elements until the late 1990s, but the 1979 issue serves as a bridge between earlier decades of traditional coinage and the changes that would come with the state quarters program starting in 1999. For many Americans, The Washington quarter of 1979 was simply pocket change. Yet today, for those who study coins, it offers insights into American life. In the late 20th century, its commonness in circulation masks the intricate stories hidden within die varieties, proof distinctions, and minting practices. Collectors often reflect on the condition of 1979 quarters, with those graded in mint state or proof-like condition, commanding higher values than well-circulated examples. The grading system developed by the numismatic community plays a crucial role in how these coins are appraised, with top-quality specimens earning significant premiums. The artistry of Flanagan's design, when fully struck and preserved in pristine condition, can be truly striking. The fine lines of Washington's hair, the sharpness of the eagle's feathers, and the clarity of the inscriptions combine to create an enduring reminder of America's numismatic heritage. Thus, the Washington quarter of 1979, while seemingly ordinary, is far from simple. It embodies decades of tradition, honors. The legacy of George Washington reflects the economic and cultural context of its time and presents collectors with endless opportunities for study and discovery, from its origins in the bicentennial celebrations of 1932 to its production in the challenging economic climate of 1979. This coin weaves together threads of history, art, politics, and daily life. Its presence in millions of pockets across America was a silent witness to an era, and today it continues to hold a place in the collections and imaginations of those who seek to understand the story of America through its coinage. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that marks one of the most important turning points in American numismatic history, a coin that represents not only everyday commerce, but also a dramatic shift in the United States monetary system. The 1965 Washington quarter is not just another date in the long-running Washington quarter series. It is the very coin that signaled the end of an era when silver disappeared from circulating coinage and a new copper-nickel-clad composition took its place. This change was not merely a matter of metallurgy. It was a reflection of a changing economy, a nation facing silver shortages, rising demand for coinage, and policy shifts that would forever alter the landscape of American coin production. To fully understand the history of the 1965 Washington quarter, we must first go back to the very origins of the Washington quarter itself. The Washington quarter was first introduced in 1932 during the bicentennial of George Washington's birth. The Treasury Department and the United States Mint wanted to honor the first president of the United States with a coin that would reflect his importance and leadership, and a national competition was held to determine the design. Many artists submitted their proposals, but it was the sculptor, John Flanagan, whose design ultimately won the approval of officials. His obverse design featured a bust of George Washington based on the famous 1785 bust created by Jean-Antoine Houdon, a French neoclassical sculptor who had personally observed Washington at Mount Vernon. Flanagan's version presented Washington in a left-facing profile with a strong, dignified expression, the word liberty prominently arched above his head, the motto, "In God We Trust," placed just to the left, and the year of issue below Washington's neckline. The reverse displayed an eagle with wings spread, clutching a bundle of arrows, symbolizing strength and readiness for defense, with olive branches beneath symbolizing peace. This basic design would remain largely unchanged for decades, and it is this same design that appears on the 1965 issue from 1932 until 1964. Washington quarters were struck in 90% silver and 10% copper. These silver quarters weighed 6.25 grams and had long been a staple in American commerce as well as in the collections of coin enthusiasts. However, by the early 1960s, the situation surrounding silver had begun to change dramatically. Rising industrial demand for silver combined with increased use in coinage led to severe pressure on the national silver supply. The price of silver was climbing steadily, and the intrinsic value of silver coins was beginning to approach and in some cases even exceed their face value. This created a dangerous situation for the U.S. Mint and the Treasury, because the more valuable the metal content of a coin became, the greater the incentive for people to hoard or melt down coins for their bullion value. In 1964, the crisis reached its peak. Americans were lining up at banks, withdrawing rolls of silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars and holding them tightly. Many coins vanished from circulation altogether, as both the public and dealers anticipated that the government would eventually remove silver from coinage. President Lyndon B. Johnson and Treasury Secretary C. Douglas Dillon faced an unprecedented challenge. There was simply not enough silver to sustain circulating coinage at its traditional levels, and the production of coins was falling far short of the needs of a growing population and expanding economy. Thus, in 1965, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1965, a landmark piece of legislation that authorized a fundamental change in the composition of dimes and quarters. Removing silver altogether and introducing a copper-nickel clad composition, the act declared that dimes and quarters would henceforth be struck from an outer layer of 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded to a pure copper core. The weight of the quarter was adjusted to 5.67 grams, and the diameter remained unchanged at 24.3 millimeters. This clad composition gave the coin a silvery appearance, but no actual silver content, and thus ended the use of silver in circulating quarters. The Washington quarter of 1965 was the very first year of this new clad coinage, and because of this, it occupies a special place in the history of American numismatics collectors, and historians recognize it as the coin that symbolizes the great transition from traditional silver to modern clad coinage. The 1965 quarters were struck in massive numbers as the Mint attempted to relieve the nationwide coin shortage, with production taking place at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, though notably coins of 1965 carried no mint marks, a decision made to discourage hoarding by reducing the distinctions between different mint issues. Despite lacking silver, the 1965 Washington quarter retained the familiar design of Flanagan's Washington portrait and eagle reverse, which gave continuity to the series. Yet the physical differences were clear to anyone familiar with the earlier issues. The new clad quarters had a slightly different color tone, a distinctive reddish copper edge visible on the rim, and a different ring when dropped compared to their silver predecessors. To the casual spender, this may have gone unnoticed, but to coin enthusiasts and bullion hoarders, it was an unmistakable transformation. As collectors study the 1965 Washington quarter, they often explore its role in the broader monetary and social context of the mid-20th century. The mid-1960s were years of cultural change, economic shifts, and rapid technological development, and the alteration of the nation's coinage was just one reflection of these transformations. The Coinage Act of 1965 was also significant because it suspended the striking of silver dollars for several years, authorized the production of Kennedy half dollars in a reduced silver content of 40%, and reaffirmed the authority of the Treasury and the Mint to make changes to ensure stability in the coinage system. The act essentially gave birth to the modern era of U.S. circulating coins, all of which, except for special collector issues, would be produced without silver. The year 1965 also produced interesting numismatic anomalies, for while official production of silver quarters had ceased after 1964, a very small number of 1965 dated quarters were mistakenly struck on leftover 90% silver planchets. These error coins are incredibly rare and highly prized by collectors. When authenticated by grading services, they can command thousands of dollars at auction. These silver planche 1965 quarters serve as a fascinating reminder of the transition period and the challenges the Mint faced in changing over to a completely new metallic system. From a circulation standpoint, the clad 1965 quarter performed its role admirably. It was durable, easy to strike, and more cost Effective than silver, it circulated widely across the country in vending machines, parking meters, and everyday commerce, and Americans quickly adjusted to using the new coin, even if some nostalgia remained for the silver versions. The legacy of the 1965 Washington quarter stretches far beyond its metallic content. It represents the adaptation of a nation to economic realities, the resilience of a coin design that endured through changing eras, and the beginning of a new chapter in the history of American money. When viewed today by collectors, it may seem like an ordinary coin of little face value, but its historical significance cannot be overstated because it tells the story of how America left silver behind in order to preserve the stability of its currency. Over the course of decades, the 1965 Washington quarter has gained recognition as a coin that every collector should understand. Whether or not it is considered rare, its importance lies in context in what it represents. For the nation's economic and monetary history, scholars, numismatists, and everyday enthusiasts continue to study the coin not only for its design and production, but also for what it symbolizes: the evolution of American coinage. So when you hold a 1965 Washington quarter, take a moment to consider its story. The story of a coin that emerged at the very moment when tradition gave way to necessity, when silver gave way to clad, and when the American people adjusted to a new reality. It is more than a piece of change. It is a piece of history. It is the bridge between two eras, and it continues to speak to us about the challenges and decisions of a nation navigating its economic destiny.